When the blizzard at last loosened its icy grip on the valley, the town of Redwood woke slowly, as if remembering it still existed. Ice weighed down every roof, every crooked fence post, every lonely stop sign that rattled in the biting wind. At Harry's Grill, the world seemed just as still and uncertain as the gray morning beyond its frostbitten windows. The truckers packed up their gear in silence. Heavy boots crunched on the salted threshold. Faded jackets were zipped against the cutting wind. One by one, the men and women who had filled the diner with rare warmth shook Harry's hand or clapped him on the back, murmuring their thanks. They left no promises behind, only tired nods and handshakes that meant more than words. Their diesel engines rumbled to life, sending plumes of exhaust skyward like prayers on a bitter wind. Harry stood at the doorway as they drove off, the snow-banked lot shuddering under the slow, deliberate weight of the departing trucks. Their tire tracks crisscrossed the lot in frantic patterns, now fading quickly under a new dusting of flurries, as if the storm itself meant to erase even the memory of their presence. Inside, the diner felt hollow once more. The coffee had run out. The last of the bacon was long gone, along with the canned goods from the dusty pantry shelves. The refrigerator's humming grew louder in the emptiness, a mechanical groan that seemed to echo Harry's own fatigue. The few battered plates that remained unbroken were stacked neatly by the sink, their chipped edges a testament to stubborn survival. Harry moved slowly from table to table, wiping down surfaces that needed no cleaning. His hand lingered on the wood grain of the counter, worn smooth by decades of elbows, coffee cups, late-night conversations. The rag in his hand moved without thought, the rhythm of it a ritual he could not yet abandon. The old radio on the counter crackled weakly, its signal barely reaching through the storm-shrouded hills. Static hissed between snatches of news about road closures and fallen power lines. Harry turned the volume down until it was just a whisper, then off altogether. Silence reclaimed the diner, thick and familiar. Behind the counter, he pulled open the register. A few crumpled bills and coins lay scattered in the till, not enough to cover the heating bill taped to the cash drawer with a thumbtack, the words "Final Notice" stamped in angry red letters across the top. Harry closed the drawer gently, as if shutting a chapter he was not ready to end. In the pantry, the shelves yawned with emptiness. A lone can of peaches clinked as he moved it aside, revealing a spider's web stretched across the back of the shelf like a forgotten flag. Harry smiled a little at that. Even the spiders had mostly moved on. In the kitchen, the deep fryer sat cold, its oil congealed and sour-smelling. The old grill bore the marks of countless breakfasts served at dawn to men in hard hats and hunters in orange vests. The place had been a lifeline once, not just to him, but to the town itself. He remembered Margaret standing right there by the pass window, smiling and calling out orders with a voice that could lift even the weariest morning. Margaret had been gone 10 years now. Cancer, swift and merciless, had carried her off in less time than it took to close the books on a bad fiscal year. He had buried her under a maple tree near the edge of town, the same tree under which they had shared picnics in their youth. Some days, it felt like he was still sitting under that tree, waiting for her to come back. Harry rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the bristle of days without a proper shave. He wasn't ready to admit it aloud, but he knew the truth. Harry's Grill was a relic now, a stubborn flicker against the night that had already fallen. A stack of unopened mail sat on a corner table. Past due notices, foreclosure warnings, letters from the bank. He hadn't had the heart to open them lately. What would be the point? The debt had been creeping in for years, a slow, inevitable tide. The new highway, built miles south of Redwood, had been the final blow. Travelers who once made detours for a slice of Harry's homemade pie now sped past on sleek asphalt, their GPS voices never mentioning his little town at all. The door creaked in its frame as the wind picked up. Harry crossed the empty dining room and reached for the sign that hung by a frayed piece of string. With a heavy hand, he flipped it from open to closed. The thunk of it against the glass seemed louder than it should have been, like a judge's gavel. He lingered by the door, staring out at the ghost town beyond. The gas station across the street had boarded up months ago. The hardware store where he'd once bought bolts and pipe fittings now displayed a for-lease sign half buried by snow. Even the post office operated on shortened hours, its cheerful flag drooping limp in the cold. This was it. The last breath of a life built by calloused hands and morning coffees, by double shifts and Sunday pancakes. He could almost hear Margaret's laughter floating through the diner, the way it used to when regulars filled the booths and the bell over the door rang every few minutes. But now there was only the low moan of the wind and the distant, ghostly rattle of ice skimming across the frozen sidewalks. Harry walked back behind the counter, where a battered thermos sat, the same one he had used every day for 3 decades. It was dented and scratched, its paint chipped away until only memories clung to the metal. He poured the last of the coffee into a chipped mug, cradling it between his withered hands. The warmth was meager, but it was something. He thought of the truckers, the men and women who had trusted him enough to sleep on his floor, to share his last cans of soup, to sit hunched over plastic tables as the storm howled around them. He had fed them without thinking twice. He had offered shelter not because it made sense on a balance sheet, but because kindness was something he had never learned to ration. Harry sipped the lukewarm coffee and stared at the silent walls. He wondered if he had been foolish to give so much when he had so little. He wondered if anyone would even remember Harry's grill once the snow covered the tracks and time wore away the edges of memory. But no matter how he turned it over in his mind, one simple truth remained: he had done the right thing. Without question, without hesitation. Because that was the kind of man Margaret had loved, and he had never wanted to be anything less. The last light of day faded from the windows, bleeding the diner into darkness. Harry sat alone behind the counter, the empty diner stretching before him like a frozen field. Somewhere deep in the gathering night, a single set of headlights flickered far down the abandoned road, but then vanished. Silence settled once more. Harry leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened to it. As if the silence, in its heavy, unbroken way, was saying, "You are not forgotten. Not yet." The next evening arrived wrapped in a heavy, unnatural quiet. Snow fell steadily again, but softer now, layering the world in fresh white and masking the brokenness underneath. Harry's grill sat dark, the neon sign buzzing faintly, half of the letters flickering like a failing heartbeat. Harry was closing the kitchen for good. He wiped down the griddle one final time, moving slower than he realized. Every scrape of the steel spatula against metal felt like erasing part of himself. The old place had given him a reason to rise each morning, to keep the loneliness at bay with coffee cups and sunny side-up eggs. Without it, he wasn't sure what would be left. He hung the stained apron over its hook behind the counter, a small ceremony he performed without thinking, and reached for the light switch. That was when he heard it, a distant, low rumble carried on the cold night air. A sound that didn't belong to the emptiness. At first he thought it might be the wind playing tricks. He stood motionless, one hand hovering near the switch. Then the rumble grew louder. Tires crunching snow. Engines growling. Heavy, purposeful. Harry shuffled to the front door, heart beginning to hammer harder than it had in years. Through the frosted glass he saw them, headlights in the dark, one after another, multiplying like a dream he didn't dare believe. Trucks. Big rigs, pickups, delivery vans, more than he could count, all pulling into the empty lot like a convoy. Their headlights swept across the crumbling pavement, turning the snow into 1,000 tiny stars. He unlocked the door with trembling fingers, the cold seeping in immediately, but he hardly noticed. The first truck stopped a few feet from the diner. Its driver climbed down, a burly man in a battered parka, and gave Harry a nod that held something deeper than words. Behind him, doors slammed. Men and women poured out, wearing heavy coats, scarves, gloves. Some familiar faces among them, the ones who had sheltered in his diner just days before, and many strangers too, drawn here by something unseen but undeniable. The truck's rear doors swung open, and the unloading began. Boxes upon boxes of canned food, fresh produce, sacks of flour and sugar. New kitchen equipment still gleaming in their packaging, a griddle, a commercial coffee machine, sets of plates and cups wrapped in newsprint. There were mattresses, space heaters, shelves of supplies, even a brand new cash register. Harry stood frozen in the doorway, disbelief washing over him like a second blizzard. Someone tapped his shoulder, a young woman with a clipboard, bundled against the cold. "Mr. Matthews," she asked, voice bright. "We're from United Freight Alliance. When the story of what you did during the storm started circulating online, trucking groups all across the country pitched in. Donations, supplies, manpower. You saved our own, now we're here to save your place." He tried to speak, but his throat closed up. His hands trembled worse than they had that night in the storage room. A tall man with a sheriff's badge appeared next, his gloved hand extended. "Harry Matthews," the sheriff said solemnly, "this town might have forgotten you. But your kindness reached farther than you ever knew." Harry shook the offered hand, his grip weak but filled with gratitude. As he stepped aside, the workers moved inside. The diner filled instantly with life and noise, laughter, the scrape of boots, the thud of heavy boxes set down, the crackle of plastic wrapping ripped open. A radio somewhere played old rock tunes, and someone started a pot of fresh coffee brewing with the new machine. Within an hour, Harry's grill no longer looked like a tomb. It looked like a beginning. A team of volunteers scrubbed every surface. New ceiling panels were hoisted into place. Tables were refinished, chairs mended and painted. The broken neon sign outside flickered off, then back on, this time burning steady and proud. While Harry sat in stunned silence at the corner booth, watching his world transform, a younger man approached. He wore a denim jacket lined with fleece, a ball cap pulled low over his face. "Name's Jimmy," he said, setting a folder on the table. "I'm a lawyer. My dad, he was one of the truckers you fed that night. He told me what you did. I'm here to help save this place legally, too." Harry stared at the folder. Inside were papers, mortgage renegotiation forms, bankruptcy shields, grant applications he hadn't even known existed. "You're not losing this diner," Jimmy said. "Not on our watch." From the far corner, a camera flashed. A local journalist had arrived, capturing the unfolding miracle. She scribbled notes furiously, her expression flickering between astonishment and tears. Outside, trucks kept coming. Some carried new diner uniforms embroidered with the grill's logo. Some brought winter coats and boots, donations for any traveler who needed them. One trucker even set up a portable generator to ensure the diner would stay warm until the electrical grid caught up. By midnight, the old place buzzed with energy it hadn't felt in years. The kitchen gleamed. The floors shined. The air smelled of fresh paint and brewed coffee instead of mildew and despair. Harry sat behind the counter, a mug of coffee cradled in both hands, not even trying to hide the tears that streaked his withered cheeks. The chair next to him creaked as someone sat down, an older woman with a thick scarf and kind eyes. "You gave strangers warmth without asking for anything," she said softly. "Tonight, the world gave it back." He nodded slowly, the words too heavy to speak. The snow fell softer now, barely brushing the windows, a delicate reminder of the storm that had once almost buried him. But in this moment, Harry Matthews was not a man at the end of something. He was a man standing at the threshold of a second chance. And this time, he would not stand alone. The next morning, sunlight broke across the snow like a gentle hand smoothing wrinkles from an old quilt. The ice on the windows melted into clear rivers, and for the first time in a long time, Harry's grill was not a place of endings but of beginnings. Harry woke early, just as he had for 30 years, but this morning felt different. His joints ached as usual, but the pain seemed lighter somehow, like his body understood there was work worth waking up for again. He pulled on his flannel shirt, now neatly pressed thanks to a volunteer who had found it crumpled behind the counter, and stepped into the diner. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon filled the air. Not the tired smell of desperation, but the rich, warm scent of life in motion. Volunteers bustled about, tightening bolts, replacing burned-out bulbs, polishing windows until they shone like lakes under the morning sun. Jimmy, the young lawyer, sat at a booth near the door, papers spread out around him like battle plans. He was on the phone with a lender, his voice steady, relentless. Harry caught only snippets, new terms, community business designation, forgiveness application. Words he didn't fully understand, but words that sounded like hope. Across the room, a new coffee machine gleamed behind the counter, a donation from a trucking company based 3 states away. Its polished chrome surface reflected Harry's worn face back at him, but the reflection didn't seem as tired as before. It seemed rooted, solid. The front door jingled, and in walked a group of drivers, trucker caps pulled low, jackets dusted with snow. They carried more supplies, racks of bottled water, boxes of non-perishables, even a portable generator. "We made a deal," one of them said, setting down a box with a heavy thump. "Our routes are gonna stop here now. Regular. Like clockwork." Harry blinked at them, not trusting his voice enough to answer. He simply nodded, throat tightening. The drivers moved easily through the diner, setting down their burdens with the familiarity of men arriving home. Out in the parking lot, a group of young volunteers were installing a new wooden sign by the road. Carved deep into the grain were the words, "Haven at Redwood, a home for the road-weary." Harry watched from the window as the last screws were driven in, a sense of something sacred taking root deep in his chest. This wasn't just his diner anymore. It belonged to all of them, the truckers, the townspeople, the strangers who had become family overnight. As the morning wore on, more visitors arrived. A carpenter who once ate Harry's meatloaf every Friday night brought his tools and set to work reinforcing the sagging porch. An electrician, who had lost his job 2 years earlier but found new purpose working for one of the trucking outfits, rewired the flickering lights in the kitchen. Even the town's mayor, a man Harry hadn't seen in a decade, showed up with a heavy envelope marked Emergency Infrastructure Grant Approval. The mayor, red-faced and awkward, shuffled his feet as he handed it over. "Should have done this sooner," he muttered. Harry accepted it with a firm grip, meeting the man's eyes. No bitterness. No anger. Only quiet gratitude. By midday, the diner buzzed with life like it hadn't since the summer fairs of the late 80s. The booths were filled with drivers swapping stories. The tables groaned under the weight of donated food. Kids from the local school, bundled against the cold, brought hand-painted welcome signs and taped them proudly to the windows. Marge, the retired waitress who had once worked side by side with Harry and Margaret, walked in wiping her hands on a flour-covered apron. Someone had pulled her out of retirement for the day. She cracked an egg into a sizzling pan with the same easy grace she had all those years ago. "Thought you could use an extra set of hands," she said with a wink. Harry couldn't help but laugh, a deep, warm sound that seemed to shake dust off the rafters. Later that afternoon, the sheriff returned, this time in dress uniform. He carried a small velvet box, the kind used for medals. He asked Harry to stand by the new sign as the townspeople gathered around, the truckers lining the lot, their diesel rigs glinting under the winter sun. The sheriff cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "For extraordinary kindness shown in a time of need, and for reminding us what true service looks like," he said, opening the box. Inside lay a commemorative coin, engraved with the town seal on one side, and a single word on the other. "Guardian." The sheriff placed it into Harry's hand, closing his fingers gently over it. Around him, the townspeople, some who had not set foot in Harry's grill in years, stood silently, hats removed, heads bowed against the sharp cold. The same men and women who had once looked through him, past him, now stood shoulder to shoulder, their silence saying more than any speech. Harry held the coin tight in his palm. It was heavier than it looked. The mayor stepped forward next, clearing his throat. "We've been a town asleep," he said, voice trembling just slightly. "You woke us up, Harry Matthews. Not with speeches, not with anger, but with a plate of food and a warm place to rest. You saved more than truckers that night. You saved Redwood from forgetting itself." The applause that followed was not loud, but it was real. Raw. Healing. Harry looked down at the coin again, his fingers tracing the letters slowly. Guardian. He had not saved his diner. He had saved something bigger, something not measured in receipts or bank balances. Something that could not be foreclosed. And maybe, he thought, that had been the point all along. A week later, The sign at the edge of town no longer read simply Redwood, population 2,304. Someone had added in bold spray paint beneath it, home of Harry's Haven. No one bothered to scrub it off. At Harry's Grill, now officially registered as Haven at Redwood, the days began early and ended late. Truckers, townsfolk, drifters, and lost souls of every kind found their way to the little diner tucked between the abandoned gas station and the broken stoplight. Harry moved through it all slowly, deliberately. He didn't rush anymore. He didn't have to. The once empty booths filled quickly each morning, the counters lined with fresh coffee and easy laughter. Truckers swapped stories of roads seen and storms survived. Veterans recognized the old military photos Margaret had framed years ago, still hanging proudly on the walls. At the back of the diner, where a dusty storage closet used to be, volunteers had built 2 showers and a small laundry room, basic, but clean and warm. A bulletin board near the cash register bloomed with handwritten notes. Need a ride to Denver? We'll split gas. Hiring help at McCoy's garage, apply in person. Thank you, Harry, CB Handle Ghost Runner. Harry often found himself reading those notes in the early mornings, a mug of steaming coffee in his hand, the world just waking. The diner had become more than a place to eat, it was a place to belong. Not everything was perfect. The plumbing froze sometimes. Deliveries got delayed. And there were still slow days when the register barely rang. But the loneliness that once haunted the corners of the grill had lifted. It lived somewhere else now, displaced by purpose. Harry, once alone in his fight to survive, now had a team. Marge returned to work 3 mornings a week, young volunteers manned the kitchen in the afternoons, and Jimmy set up a small office near the back where he helped truckers and townsfolk alike with paperwork and legal headaches. Even the old jukebox, dormant for years, started working again after a couple of kids tinkered with its insides. Some days, Elvis or Johnny Cash floated through the air, curling around the scent of bacon and maple syrup. There was a rhythm again, a heartbeat to the place. And through it all, Harry sat at his usual stool by the counter, a thermos never far from reach, the coin from the ceremony resting in a glass case near the register where everyone could see it. A silent symbol that sometimes, the smallest kindness was enough to change the course of a life, or a whole town. Late at night, after the last truck had pulled away into the starlit distance and the final coffee cup was washed and stacked, Harry would lock the front door and stand by the window, looking out across the lot. He thought of Margaret often. In those quiet hours, he imagined her sitting at a booth with a cup of coffee, smiling at the life they had built together, then, now, and always. He didn't speak to her picture hung by the register. He didn't need to. In the hush of the diner, and the faint hum of the jukebox left spinning a low, forgotten tune, Harry felt her answer. One night, as the snow returned in soft waves, a convoy of trucks pulled into the lot. Their trailers bore no cargo. Their drivers bore no rush. They simply came, parked, and filed into the diner, stamping snow from their boots, filling the place with stories, laughter, and the scent of leather and road dust. Harry stayed behind the counter, serving hot coffee and pie, listening. When the clock struck midnight, the youngest among them, barely old enough to rent a rig, stood and tapped his coffee mug with a fork. A ripple of silence moved through the room. One by one, the truckers lifted their mugs in salute, to Harry, to Haven, to the idea that no one is forgotten if even one person remembers to care. Harry lifted his mug in return, heart full to breaking. In that moment, he understood something Margaret had tried to teach him long ago, something that had always lingered in the smell of fresh coffee and the warmth of a shared table. Kindness without question was not just enough. It was everything. Outside, the snow fell like a benediction. And inside, Haven at Redwood glowed like a lighthouse on a long, lonely road, steady, certain, and finally, forever home.